Hello, people. Derek, Denver Yoga Underground. So good to see you. Want to share some reflections on relationship between mindfulness practice and Hatha Yoga. So both Hatha Yoga and mindfulness are contemplative practices or means by which we can become more integrated, by which we can elevate our center of gravity and live more fulfilled life and have spiritual insight. So, what then is the distinction or import between these two methodologies, and where do they overlap or converge? Let's start with mindfulness, and we'll emphasize this. The term itself was coined by John Kabat-Zinn, who studied Buddhist practice over in the East for many years, and then adopted those techniques and methodologies in a more sort of clinical environment or setting. He's a psychologist, and it received a new name, one that could be more I don't know, readily accepted. You say Buddhism, and there's certain like charges and associations and so forth that go along with that. You say mindfulness, and like people can get it more readily. And it's somewhat fashionable. Like people, it worked, right? Like people get the concept of mindfulness as a universal practice, which it is. Mindfulness means that there's a kind of heightened and spacious attention to whatever it is that you're doing. In other words, you're more aware of uh, uh, any activity that you're engaged in. And so the classic example is doing the dishes or driving or formal meditation practice. These are all instances in which one becomes very conscious and present to whatever activity is being engaged in, um, not necessarily to the exclusion of everything else. There's just a heightened sense of attention. And this, the value of that methodology, it draws you into, say, our typical mental story or narrative and into what's actually happening. And the beauty of this technique is that it can be applied in everywhere you think you can take mindfulness with you. And it's universal and not doesn't have any sectarian flavor to it. And formal meditation practice is a good way to develop the muscle of mindfulness so that you can then take it with you in all life instances when in say a conflict in relationship or you know the perennial traffic example or gardening. Right, these are all places we can practice mindfulness. Now it's best to install the fire extinguisher and the fire alarm before the house is burning. In other words, to develop the muscle or the technique of mindfulness before there's some agitating conflict that then puts it in challenge. So it can be harder to summon the force of of mindfulness in with in a heated situation or conflict. And the same is true for being able to say uh, be aware of one's breath or to regulate or control one's breath in a heightened state of conflict. Okay, so mindfulness, the primary inroad into, let's just say, spiritual awareness or greater self-awareness uh, is through the medium of the mind. And to kind of go back to the Buddhist context, you can see a picture of Gautama Buddha behind me, or statue, Murti, uh, was towards the elevated spiritual insight, or what Buddha called nirvana, which means without wind. So, like the placid surface of a lake in which there's zero distortion or fluctuation or modification or ripple. You can, everything just like the mirror of a still lake, ever so. I feel like peaceful just describing this wonderful lake, and the reflection, like what's actually happening, is clearly reflected in that lake. There's no, if we're, the lake is the mind, there's no sort of distorting ripples as to what's actually happening. One's very mindful of what's actually happening. So nirvana means without, without, without wind. And this is, you know, the pinnacle of mindful achievement. You know, common presentation, we don't talk about, you know, kind of the most exalted spiritual attainment of what's possible through the medium of mindfulness. There's generally more, you know, in the general public, we talk about it more generally in relationship to the dishes and whatnot. So that's the crux or the apex. Hatha Yoga also orients towards some sense of zenith, and the words we use there is moksha or liberation or kaivalya, which means liberation in many ways, a little different slant. These are more kind of yoga-y terms for the sense of ascended spiritual awakening. And now in the case of mind, or rather Hatha Yoga, the cornerstone technique. So if we're building a triangle, over here we have mindfulness, way to enter the ultimate. And over here, Hatha Yoga, the cornerstone is managing prana, or using the medium of prana, life force energy, to become more integrated and have deeper degrees of insight. Now, as it so happens, there's a relationship. So prana and chitta, the force of mind, share an immutable connection. In other words, your energy pattern shifts according to the manner in which you are thinking, the atmosphere of how you feel, the manner in which you breathe. These are all evidence of the pranic force. Change in relationship to the mind fluctuations. Now, prana is also more of a, you know, esoteric principle or a metaphysical principle. It's less abstract. It's less easy to, not less easy necessarily, but it's a little more abstract and metaphysical, which can be a barrier to entry for a lot of people in understanding the metaphysical dynamics or underpinnings of Hatha Yoga and how to manage your energy. And, you know, this looks like directing prana into chakras, and where are those chakras? I don't see them. You know, there can be some skepticism around the a pranic orientation. In Hatha Yoga, we mold or sculpt the pranic body to affect the mind. And let's just say you can mold or scope it, you know, through the breath and so-called visualization, or, you know, concentrating on a chakra, for example. This is the way that we start to interface with the subtle body or with the pranic body. And as we do that, it influences the mind. You might think of pranic meditation or Hatha Yoga approach as a kind of hack to go through the back door of shifting the medium of the mind, which has, you know, a strong momentum behind it, a strong agenda. You know, we may find ourselves choosing to do a behavior, not even choosing, right? Being compelled to do a behavior that our higher awareness knows is not supportive or healthy. Or, you know, smoking, for example, like, I want to quit smoking, but, you know, the train or the bus or the boat just leaves the station, and you go along with it, the bus of smoking. Whereas over here, with the pranic approach, we could change our breath or do yoga asana and things like this to build more resilience in the system and influence our mindscape, as opposed to taking a more of this, you know, passive approach of just being aware of your desire to smoke, both of which are complement one another. They feed or support one one another. And their ultimate intent is parallel as well. It's a similar intent. Just the import or the methodology, pranic techniques tend to be much more dynamic. So I kind of come back to here. We see these yantras behind me. These, in a sense, are a way of interfacing with esoteric pranic principles, the prana shakti, or I won't get into that so much, but so you get the basic idea, right? There's a connection, but they're also distinct or input. Okay, so thank you all for listening. Thanks to all who've been subscribing. Invite you to come back again. All right, cheers, people. Peace.